Welcome back to the Profit School by MeasureU podcast. This is the AI first edition, conversation between myself, Jeff Sauer, and my business partner, Mercer. And today we're going to be talking about podcast marketing for growth. I think this will be a fun one. Since you're listening to a podcast, you can get some of the nitty gritty and the dirty little secrets about our podcast, as well as being a guest on podcasts and just everything around podcasts and how it can impact your growth and how it can help your business. So with that out of the way, let's go ahead and hand it over to Mercer to talk about the idea of podcast marketing for growth. What do you think about when you hear this idea?
So as I'm going through this, I'm thinking about a few things. One, what do we mean by podcast? Is it I have to have my own podcast? Is it being guest on other people's podcasts? Maybe it's just reusing people's existing podcasts that I have nothing to do with. So we could do things like that. And then obviously the marketing for growth part is what are we doing with all of that? Are there any best practices for maybe any of those three specific directions that we could use? How about you?
Yeah, it's very similar. So it's funny, before we always do a pre-show prep, and I said to you, do we really want to talk about podcast marketing for growth and talk about our podcast as the exemplary reason and way to grow? And I was like, I don't know if that's something that we want to we're not going to be teaching people all these secrets, because our podcast is really a passion project. It's a really fun way to hang out, but it's not something that we've used majorly as a growth. It's really a way to solidify our ideas and to get it out to the world. Yet we have been successful in being on other people's podcasts. That's how a lot of people hear about us, hear about our frameworks. It's a long form way of delivering content, being interviewed. And so you can really get people to change their minds in that short period of time. And so it can be a great way to grow and to build an audience. And so there's a lot of value in podcasts. We see it. And we actually want to go forward and help define the ideas here behind that for growing with podcasts, whether it's your own or being on other people's podcasts, some tactics we've used, and just go forward with it. So yeah, let's go ahead and So I know you've. Go ahead.
Well, I was going to say, just in taking a step back around the strategy of podcasts, because it goes to your point of hey, how do we get people to change their minds and everything on the podcast? I think the reason it works is, and specifically for us, because we've got these selling measurement stuff, right? Or like ProfitSchool, the AI first. AI is definitely a lot easier to sell. Don't get me wrong right now, right? But it won't be eventually. It's all things go away. But at a certain point, if you have a product that requires the market to understand they have a problem that they do not know they have, which is kind of like the measurement issue, right? It's not that they don't know how to use Google Analytics properly. That's what they think their problem is, but it's because they don't have a proper measurement strategy that they are using Google Analytics for improperly. And the problem they have is they don't use the right measurement strategy, and that's what they need to learn, right? That's really hard to communicate on just a direct offer page when somebody's coming in to just buy a Google Analytics course because they think that's what their problem is. It's in the past anyway. It's been harder to sort of flip that switch. But when you can be on somebody's podcast, right? I was just on one yesterday. There's a copywriter's podcast, and talking to them, or to the host, right? And sort of going through there and saying, okay, well, here's what happens with measurement as it relates to copywriting, how you can use it and how you can do this and you can do this and you can do this and you can do this. And they start going, oh my gosh, I had no idea that was even possible. Then they're all of a sudden in the market. And what's happened is that podcast is almost like a webinar is kind of how I think about them, because that's why I think why webinars work and why podcasts work is because it's warming up the audience. You're taking an audience who's kind of cold to the brand. They have no idea who you are, who your brand is. You're slowly warming them up. You're giving them a series of different, beliefs or structures or strategies along the way that they kind of go oh, that's cool. I've never thought about it like that. Now they're more likely to continue the journey with you. And that's why I like podcasts, because of that long form ability to talk something through and, even deep dive on specific things.
I really like that distinction. It's I wrote down it's like the at-home version of brand building, because what made
that's exactly right. Yeah, I love that idea. I love that a lot, because that's exactly what that is.
Yeah, exactly. Like when I started in the mid 2000s, the way that I built my brand and that I built my network was by going to live events and talking to people one-on-one. Or sometimes presenting at events, speaking, that type of stuff, rubbing elbows. You have your internet marketing party you've been part of for over a decade. And that's these relationships are built that way. Yet that's a pretty big commitment to do that. And it's hard to stand out and it's hard to really scale. So, versus other things that scale where you're completely broadcasting, you're a YouTube channel, or you don't have any interaction whatsoever. there's got to be something in between. And I think that podcasts fill that void. So you're not having to go on the road in order to meet new people, yet you can have these conversations. It's long form, so you can change somebody's mind or introduce them to a new topic and concept, get them to be interested, and then they can learn more about you over and over again. So I like that as it's a brand building play. At least that's how we treat it. And it makes sense to be able to do that because it's really hard to do otherwise. Now, I also started doing podcasting because I thought it was a way to build up like my SEO authority, get links back to your website and get people to mention you and get them to talk about you on social, and you get all these followers. The funny thing is that stuff is not really happening all as much, I think, for podcasts. It really is just trying to find that core group of people who believe in you and who like what you have to say to learn more about you. So it's really truly top of funnel, not like a closing thing. Although you have examples of actually closing people from hearing you on a podcast, and so it can happen. And so I think that's really interesting. But yeah, I think that there's a lot of benefits to podcasting or being a guest on podcasts. A lot of them, they're changing though. So being an authority or being a brand is really what we're looking at here. But also, you're basically creating media, and media has so much value in the world right now that can be valuable as well. So any other strategies that we might have missed on that you would want to be a guest on people's podcasts, or that you would just be in the podcast universe? Any other thoughts on that?
Just in terms of, I think it was like you're saying, where in the closes, I think the reason that worked is for the same reason we talked about earlier, which is, well, they just got warmed up. Some people were already kind of close and they were just need to be pushed over the edge. It acts as a webinar in a lot of ways to get interest, right? And then you just set up a discovery call, and that's where the close is. So that's definitely where you can, close some business. The other thing that I think is important to think about is when you're trying to generate traffic, which is hard sometimes, right? If you don't have a huge paid media budget and all of that sort of stuff, or that you just can't figure out how to sort of crack that side of it. Podcasts, they're bringing in an audience, and this is how I thought about it, was because I was doing speaking from stages like you were, right? And I just happen to like public speaking. So that's a skill that I have. That's an unfair advantage compared to a lot of other business owners. I totally get that, but the idea of podcasts, the reason that's important to think about is when I was looking at a podcast, I was like, oh, they have like 300 listeners. But I was like, but if they have 300 listeners, that's 300 people in a room. If it's the exact right audience, let's say it's, people that are, there's only 300 listeners, but they're the, 300 of the Fortune 500 CEOs. Like that, why would you not want to be in that room, right? So there's these niche, super specialized podcasts that are out there that could be incredibly effective for you. You don't need to be on Joe Rogan. Yep. Right. That's what everybody thinks, I think, is like, oh, let's go on Joe Rogan. And it's like saying it's just, you're not, I mean, I guess you're going to get a little bit of a splash. Don't get me wrong. If Joe, reach out to me if you want. But I think that idea of like they're bringing this audience of people that's a target audience. You get to craft your message directly to that audience. And if it used to be called, or I was calling it tribal marketing back in the day, where it's like, I'll help your tribe and maybe some of your tribe will come over to my tribe and vice versa. And how can you help ours? And that sort of mentality works really, really well in the podcasting verse, especially when because we've had some opportunities starting up recently where people are like, hey, do you want to do a little podcast collab? And that's where it benefits into the fact that we have one that we can potentially break into something like that as well.
Yeah.
But just that idea of like that tribal marketing, the built-in audience, there's nothing better than when the podcast drops and you see leads come through that day.
Yeah. Yeah. And there's so many, basically the more you do it, the better you get. The more people are always looking for content because they have a pretty frequent, they always need new guests. They always need new ideas. They're always trying to bring new things to the table. And so it's beneficial to be a guest on other people's podcasts, and it's beneficial to you as well. And then there's also strategies around how do you actually get on to this, and what's the point, right? So you and I have used a booking service that will reach out to people and deal with a lot of that funnel stuff where they're talking about, you got to do this, or they're pitching us to other people who will have us on there. They're doing the scheduling, making sure the host shows up. I get invited on other podcasts as well, and I like that because I don't have to pay for it. But that's really stuff that falls on my lap. You could do this proactively. I have a bunch of resources on how to be on podcasts proactively that I haven't really acted on yet because it's a lot of work. And so the question is, do you want to put in the work, or do you want to just hire somebody? Do you want to build it or buy it? And what's the value? Like, what's your end game? That's another thing, is think about what your end game is. Is it just to more people to hear about you? Is it to have 300 new true fans, or is it to get links to your website? What is it? And so I think about that a lot. One of the things that I just read an article not too long ago that I shared with you, and it was just like, what type of marketing are we doing? And it has a quadrant with 4 types of marketing: direct response, product marketing, brand marketing, and customer media marketing, which is a term that I had never heard before. And it might not even be like acceptable. But the second I saw customer media marketing, it made so much sense to me. And that is where brands are becoming media companies. They're doing short form video. They're doing podcasts they're clipping out into short form. They're doing sound bites. Ultimately, it's basically making your product media so people can consume it in that way. It's product placements. There's all kinds of different things that you're doing, right? YouTube, podcasts, community, making sure that there's a community going along with what you do. Even a course on top of what your product is. So I see a lot of SaaS companies. I'm actually like on a lot of SaaS companies. I'm on their academy as the person teaching stuff because they know that customer media is a new way that they're going to find customers and they're going to build these relationships. So I think that podcasts really fall into that area. And so even though maybe it didn't have a term before, or sort of maybe we thought it was brand marketing because we've already talked about building a brand, I think that it's in this customer media marketing area, which is great because it's building a deeper relationship with somebody. So I like that term.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. And so getting back into this, I guess the brass tacks of this, right? So like, how do you get on podcasts? Let's assume I don't have, because right now I think it used to be anywhere from $150 a podcast episode is kind of what we were, at one point. And over the years that has grown. I've seen rates as high as $500 and $600, for agencies. And that can get a little pricey. Like back in the day when it was cheaper, I was doing, I just considered it like paid traffic is kind of how I thought about it. It's like, oh, instead of giving Facebook $2,000 a month, I'll, give the booking agent $2,000 a month. And they just have these constant drip of podcasts going on, which worked, which was great. It helped build the original measurement marketing.io brand. But if you don't have those funds, and especially now, there's stuff out there that exists now that didn't exist back then, right? Like I think is it Podchaser?
Yeah,
is one of the platforms now where you can kind of go on there and set up some stuff or find some people. It doesn't mean they're all going to be big podcasts again, but it doesn't matter if you're just starting out. It's important to just kind of get started. Plus, sometimes you just need to get your podcast legs down. Sometimes if you aren't used to being on a guest on a podcast or doing that sort of stuff, it's useful to get the first few out of the way with people who need guests, right? And also want to learn how to become a host. So everybody helps each other there.
Yeah, I mean, I way that I did it was I just started my own podcast and then reached out to people to ask them to be guests. And then guests started coming to me, right? And they started doing reciprocation, like, hey, I want to be on your podcast. There's a lot of things you can do with AI now. We always have to have AI talking about AI here.
For sure.
You could basically have AI crawl the top podcast lists and find topics that match your keyword and then automatically generate like some kind of outreach thing to the host or somebody on that team, or give you a list, right? So you could do that automatically where every time that there's a new podcast, you just have that you can automate the data collection and use AI to get that. You can the pitch, how you're going to position yourself, how it relates to them. You can learn everything you want to about a podcast easily with AI, like, because it's just ultimately these things are publicly available. Everybody there's mass distribution. So they don't know whether AI is downloading it and listening to it, or if it's a person, right? So there's all kinds of stuff you can do in order to do your research. Ultimately, research is the thing that's going to separate you being on good podcasts versus being on mediocre ones. It's going to help you understand whether or not it's something you'd want to be on, whether it meets your strategic value, how much of a following there is. I noticed you use something called listen notes to sort of figure out, I want something that's in the top 1% of listen notes or the top 10%, because I know that it's maintained. I know there's an audience. It needs to have a certain number of reviews. These are all criteria you can use to hone in your search. And then when you hone in your search, you basically, and even the research, you can have AI do that or assistant do that for you. And now you're making an educated guess as to whether that's worth your time or not.
Yeah, I use listen notes for two reasons. One is for the research of the podcast, right? That potentially I could be on or be a guest for. But the other one is just to go get the archive of all the podcasts I've been on. It's a really great source for that, to be like, oh, we have to go create a bunch of content from the past because I think that's a mistake I think that people make too often, is they're not the podcast they were on 2 years ago, especially, and this would be the pro tip on the content, keep it more strategic, not tactical, because tactics change, right? So if you talk about more like how you think about stuff, that's less likely to change over time. And so most of the podcast content that I have out there essentially is timeless, right? With the exception that we had a major brand change, right? So I've got that. But other than that, the content is the same. The thinking is the same. The strategies still work. It's still relevant. So we can take that content, chop it up, and then use it and as for paid ads. I can advertise the podcast. Let's say I was on Digital Marketers Podcast. I can advertise that to even the one I was on 4 years ago, because again, the strategies are the same. The tactics are different, but the strategies are exactly the same. That's what that podcast is about. The strategy of measurement, how to think about it. I can chop that up, advertise it back to the digital marketer crowd, build an audience out of that, and then start retargeting that audience, people that actually showed engagement, to become a lead or something like that too. So it helps us leverage paid media because of all this content that's out there. And to your point, to bring it back to AI, because we've done all of these podcasts, AI has scraped all of those podcasts, right? It's learned all of those podcasts that are out there. So right now, AI has very strong messaging on the things that we talk about on those podcasts because it's been out there, and it's been out there in a certain way. Like, we didn't talk about marketing measurement and how to do that. We talked about measurement marketing, and that marketing measurement was actually a mistake. It didn't go far enough, and here's why. And because we've been doing that for so long, this is what AI is saying as well, but I also think it's right. It's just super logical. And now we've got this authority system called AI that anyone in the world can ask what the difference is between those two things. And it'll tell them measurement marketing. It's not lying. It's right. It's a super logical thing. And it's validation that we now have because of the podcast. And it was like this unexpected benefit that we got from all of that, So I think over time, if you're going to be an authority, and everyone's trying to figure out where AI is going, right? But based on what's happening with Microsoft and Google and the directions that they're going, I think we're going to have these individual creator economies. We're all going to be somehow that. And how we get that out there, the more content that we're able to create, the easier way we're able to create it, the more AI can see it, the more AI sees it, the more AI knows to go to you to go get stuff. And this is where the rewards, I think, will end up coming back to creators, because they are building these systems that'll do that. So with that in mind, why not create podcasts? It's just an easy way to do it.
Yeah. I was thinking, I wrote this down. Hosting and editing your own podcast can be a great way to just get better at everything.
Yeah, there's free tools like Audacity that are out there that you just clip audio. They're made for this stuff. It's super easy. There's obviously AI tools that are out there that you can do.
Descript is a good one for it.
Descript is a great one. Yeah.
Riverside, the one that we use right now, has some really good tools as well. But yeah, the hosting and editing, it allows you to get better at asking questions. It allows you to get better to listen to people. This is if you do an interview podcast. Even if you do your own, you have to think through problems. You have to understand where you're filling dead space, where you're saying a lot. Like, because I do that all the time, and I've gotten better at it by every time I edit myself, I get better at knowing that I did that, and that I was just rambling from thought to thought. Right. So that's great. Editing yourself can be good at just figuring out who you are. And then you'd sound smarter at parties. You'd sound smarter at those in-person events that we're talking about and going forward. I also think you mentioned, like, what do you talk about, strategic versus tactical? I'm 100% on board with the strategic area because it's more timeless. You talk about strategies. Like if I'm talking about AI, I'm not talking about a tool that just got released yesterday, because you don't even know when the podcast is going out. So one of the questions I asked hosts is, when is this going to go out? Because I don't want to make it sound like this was yesterday when it could be 6 months from now, Yep. And then I just try to talk about strategic stuff. So for example, anytime I'm talking about measurement, I just talk about measurement marketing. And that's natural because that is the timeless thing that we own. And so I'm setting the industry. I'm getting the citation out there, like you mentioned, but I'm also just trying to spread the word about this thing. And it's a framework that will make it so that I'm the most unique guest they have, that I'm definitive about what I talk about, because I can just filter out everything else. If it doesn't relate to measurement marketing, then I'm just like, no, you don't need to do that. So an example is, like, if you're I'm on analytics podcasts a lot, and they're like, hey, what KPIs should I use? And I'm like, actually, we don't really believe in KPIs in our thing. Ultimately, we don't use that term because KPIs are basically an MBA's way of thinking that you can distill your business down into 3 things. Our framework actually helps you define what those things are by just asking questions. Now, it doesn't take very long, but we don't use the word KPI because KPI is oversimplifying something. What we actually use is this. And they're like, what? And it's a little bit controversial. It's like, well, I want to learn why they're not doing that. They're the only person who's actually said it's not the same 3 KPIs. If I crap on bounce rate, then they're like, wow, this guy's interesting. So you become an interesting guest by talking about the strategy and how everything fits into your strategy. So I find that measurement marketing is a great filter. And then as we go into, as I talk more about AI, we also have our AI frameworks. We also have these other things where it's like, hey, you know what? Building an automation is step 5. You need to do 4 other steps in order to get to that point. So stop working in the middle. And they're like, what? automation isn't the end game. It's like everybody's talking about scale. Scale's not the answer. Scale's the result at the end when you do these things, right? And it's like
scale?
Just rolls off the tongue because we have a framework that we can work on. So that's what we mean by strategic. It's both strategic that you're a thought leader in your area, but then also that's your brand. Ultimately, that's the thing that you're putting out there as a strategy. And I think that's really helpful because you touched on this, and then I'll hand it over to you, is that AI citations are ultimately, I was saying this in the pre-show, I think that podcast citations where you talk about something, enough of those, is going to be the new link. It's like the new link building. It's not so much that you have a like a hyperlink. That's old school 2000s technology, 2010s technology. The new one is just how often you're saying something interesting that the AI data was trained on. And podcasts are an easy thing to train on. I've invested in this company called Spark Toro. It's Rand Fishkin's company. And they used to just get all their data from Twitter, but then Twitter became a walled garden. They could never get data from Facebook, but you can always get podcast data. Podcast data is super transparent because nobody owns it. There's no walled garden of podcasts. So that's the thing that you got to think about. If you want your thoughts not in a walled garden and you want to be strategic over and over again, if you want AI to be trained on you, it's sort of like a little backdoor Trojan horse way to do it.
Yeah. Yeah, I think that's great because you're right. There are podcasts that are walled gardens, right? Where they have like the paid podcast sort of feeds. And I've never been like, it's not to say that I would never do it in the future. Maybe there is a reason to do that. I understand some models that do that. But the idea of the public feed being out there, especially if you're an educator or if you need to be known for something, like, again, you're building your own personal brand for the thing that you're really good at. You want to be out there for your company's brand. The podcasts are huge to be able to do that. So let's say, we've talked about some ways to get on podcasts. You can do Podchaser, you can network with people, ask others like, hey, do you have any podcasts that you're listening to that would be good? Or do you know of anybody who's a podcast? I'd love to be on them. Just talk to people. You will find people are looking for people all the time. It's not that hard to do it. You just need to let people know that you're looking most of the time, especially if you want to be a guest. And then if you want to start your own podcast, what recommendations would you have for that?
Yeah, if you want to start your own podcast, I would say line up, just figure out a topic, something that makes you unique. You need a name, of course, which we've changed the name a few times on this one, but that's fine. Good enough to get going. I always I did a podcast for 100 episodes as Jeff Alytics with mostly interview podcast, and I just stopped doing it after a while because I just wanted it. Like, you got to have to figure the purpose of your podcast. Are you trying to network? Are you trying to have content? Are you trying to get customers? And so starting a podcast, the technology is easy. You can use Audacity. You mentioned technology, Audacity, Descript, Riverside. You can host it on Libsyn for like $8 a month. There's even free podcast hosting things that you can use. But starting it is, what's your strategy? What's your topic? Is it going to be interview podcast versus just your thoughts? What's the length? What are your coming up with standards? And then just doing it and having no expectations for the first several episodes. They say that when you want to launch
3 years worth of episodes.
Yeah.
First several. Yeah. It's like first several years. Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, yeah. And you can even just do a podcast to yourself and then just throw them away, the first 10 of them, and edit it and everything, and then come back with your good one. And I think that's the same if you wanted to become a writer, if you wanted to start an email newsletter, everything you should do at least 10 times and get okay at it and edit yourself before you do anything to the public eye. But I think that ultimately you have to figure out your purpose. Like, what is the purpose of this podcast? One of the things that you are really good at is making sure we have an offer at the end. So you mentioned that, like, hey, I always have to have an offer at the end of your podcast. So, and that could be if you're doing it, if you're self-hosting or if you're on other people's podcasts, but just figuring out why are we doing this thing? A lot of that stuff goes into then creating a podcast. Sometimes, I wouldn't want you to get too discouraged, though, because the numbers are stacked against you. You're not going to be Joe Rogan. You're not going to be somebody who gets $100 million Spotify deal, most likely. And if you are, that's awesome. If this is what you use as motivation, good for you, like listening to this podcast. But ultimately, it's like, what is your end game? And then are you going to be as excited about it on episode 100 as you were on episode 1? And that's like, all these things are things you do before you start, because actually creating a podcast is super easy. Never been easier.
Yeah.
You basically just need to have audio at decent quality, and then there's editing and AI tools that will just do the rest of it for you. Yeah. Honestly, at this point.
Yeah, that's exactly right. And there'll probably be more and more AI tools every day. So it's like, even we could probably list some AI tools here. Some will be gone by the time that, people are listening to the podcast, but there'll be 10 or 15 new ones. So there's always those things out there as well. And I think the the idea of starting a podcast to get clients is a cool idea too, because you can go out to your clients, like you were saying, you can go out and you can reach out to prospects, interview them about something that's they care about, right? That's adjacent to what you care about, and you're building your network that way. It doesn't mean every single client's going to close, but there's a lot that will. But I've also done it with guests, like you said, being a guest on a podcast. I've done it where the podcast host themselves had me as a guest and they ended up buying from me, because they were also in the market, like in a way, like they're representing, let's say, e-commerce store owners. They happen to be an e-commerce store owner. They run a podcast helping other e-commerce store owners do better stuff with e-commerce. And we talk a measurement conversation. They're also in the market. And all of a sudden, after the podcast is over, I get the, hey, when can we go through this and jump on a call and, talk about that? So there's lots of ways a podcast can lead to business. But I think to your point, good enough to get going back to the Gusto conversation we had on, I forget when, some recent episode. That's the first step, right? G stands for good enough to get going. And I cannot emphasize that enough. The paralysis part of getting started stops a lot of people, and that's a shame. And it's because they're afraid, I think, that they need to be perfect, and you don't. Just get it moving. So, and that was episode 109, right?
Yeah, it was episode 109 where we talked about that. Yep. Yeah, and we're getting towards the end of this one, so we'll wrap it up shortly. But my final thought, and then I'll hand it over to you, and then we'll close it down, is, there's a lot of things you can do to make this super effective. And that is, what's the value you add? What's the purpose of your podcast? So if you're a host, it's what's the purpose, and am I going to have the energy to do that? And then if you're the guest, it's how do you make yourself stand up from other guests? One example is doing paid ads. Hey, we know every podcast we're on, we put $100 into doing paid ads. So you will see ads about this thing. You could just say that, and that somebody would jump onto your podcast most likely because of that. That's
true.
Or if you're the host, like, hey, we put media behind this thing, so you should want to be a guest on ours because we believe in you so much. We're going to put media money and dollars behind it. So repurposing is really, really important. Just pitching, like, what is your pitch? What is the value in this thing? That's where a booking service really is useful, because they take you, who's an expert in what you are an expert in, and they make you sound interesting to people who may not even know about you. They can help understand the strategy of what works, what gets accepted, and move you forward. But ultimately, the idea here is have a strategy, know what you're getting yourself into, and if you can stick with it, it is a great way to. There's so many benefits of it. It takes about 30 minutes on average to do a podcast episode. Very little preparation is required. You can be on camera. You're creating media. It's amazing. So why not just use it as a form to do things? And then the way that you just keep on getting better at it. The more you do, the better you are. I mean, we're running ads. Like we're running meta ads, just taking clips of a podcast, a long form one, and turning it into something. And it's getting people's eyeballs and it's getting impressions, and that's how they know who you are. So if you want to be omnipresent and you want to get your brand out there, it's really inexpensive compared to other channels because it's media, and media impressions are a lot less expensive than direct response ones. And that's where we're talking about the shift that a lot of people are going through. And the ones who've been doing it for 5 years are just running laps around people who are holding on to how we used to do things in the mid 2010s.
Yeah. Yeah. And I'd say the other thing is just, you should enjoy it. Like you were talking about, it's something do you want to keep talking about this in 100 episodes later? Can you imagine that? It should be a fun process. Cause if you do it for all those reasons and they are the reason you're doing it, you're not going to have a soul. The podcast won't have a soul. The content will be duds because it'll feel inauthentic because everyone's going to know, oh, the real reason they're doing this is so they can make a bunch of money. But if it comes across of like, no, I really love talking about this. I want to help you however I possibly can. And yes, I'm going to also make some money in the process. Who cares? Right. It's a different thing. So make sure you have the energy of something that you enjoy. And then one final thought on the idea of using a booking service. I don't know if I would, in fact, I would not start there for sure. Because I think you need to have some sort of presence for the booking service to even really want to take you on sometimes, because you think about like a PR agency, but there are podcasts who will only work through booking services. I have talked to them and they've told me this. They're like, hey, the only reason we're talking is because your service is on one of the 4 people we listen to, because as their podcast gets bigger, they can't handle 3,000 AI interruptions trying to get hosts, and they need people to filter that out. So they rely on those agencies. So there is definitely a need. We're not saying don't use an agency. I wouldn't start there right away until you've got, get your basic podcast chops up and out. Then eventually you can kind of move into that. So that's my final thought if you want to take us home.
I love that. That's great. And that wraps up this AI first conversation. Thank you for listening to the Profit School by MeasureU podcast. Share what you've learned and be sure to check out our free community at ProfitSchool.com. and rate and review on your favorite podcast platform. And we will see you in the next episode.